Annalise and I are super proud to be here, really excited. I can't match the 60 years that Ral has been in the sector. I can't match the 37 years that Richard will tell us about next. 98 days today, and not that we're counting, but a massive thank you for the welcome that this sector has given us. I was reflecting to a couple of people earlier. This is just such a friendly, welcoming, passionate, exciting place to be. And we're really excited about being part of that journey and sort of stepping onto the journey with you at this point. So great to be here. It's been an amazing first few months. I'm going to use Rebecca's standard. I think I nearly quite understood it or something to that effect. If I get to that point by the end of the day, I will be super proud. I'm not sure I will, but I'll do my very best. So I hear it's a tradition for the UK Space Agency to be here and give you a bit of a review of what's going on. So when Paul and I were discussing who's going to do what, I won, because I get to come here. He only goes to Australia and COP28. I think I've done better. My family think I've done better. I hope by the end of this year, you agree as well. And if you invite me back next year, not Paul, that'll be even better. So, what I thought I'd do, not quite in the spirit of an advent calendar, but just give you a sort of a quick skip through the year. And I'm very conscious that for 9 of the 12 months that I'm going to talk about, Annalise and I weren't here, but just to give you some of the highlights. I'll start in January, and you'd probably guess what I'm going to talk about. If we were in SpaceX, we would say this was an amazing triumph, wouldn't we? The fact that we were able to launch from the UK a rocket to take a satellite to space. The fact it didn't work and get all the way there, I don't think takes away anything from the enormous achievement that is. To take a nation from pretty much a standing start to going to do that from onshore is a huge achievement. So let's look at that through a positive light. We have learned masses, and I'll come back to our aspirations in launch later on. February, Rebecca mentioned ESA, Moonlight, satellite constellations around the moon, 2028. So £50 million funding the UK put into that programme. And how exciting is that as we start a return to the moon that we all know about. Even further afield, in April, launch of the JUICE mission to Jupiter. Really, really exciting science and from the icy moons and so on. I missed out March. In March, there was a study done that said the size and health of the UK space sector, £17.5 billion of income, 48,800 jobs and growing in the sector. And I think just take a step back, and those don't sound like big numbers. Just think about that for a minute, 48,500 people and growing. That's really impressive. And it's a real sign of a sector that's on the rise and on a crest of a wave, I think. Rebecca also mentioned the Astra Carter. That was in June. And you can't get much better than support from the King, I guess, for something like this. And that mission to make space sustainable, as Rebecca said, in all its forms, so important and absolutely at the heart of what we're doing in the Space Agency. This cannot be lip service. We have to do everything we can to be responsible users of space, to do our bit for net zero. And as Rebecca says, just saying that space does climate change data isn't enough. We have to do more, but an amazing start with the Astra Carter. July, Euclid was launched. Again, what an incredible event. Annalise, actually, the great thing about a job share is that we can indeed be in 2 places at once. So Annalise is in Edinburgh today at the Euclid celebration event. So really, really exciting. And I think you probably started to see some of the first products of that incredible mission. Of course, the intellectual inspiration for Euclid comes from the UK. September, the money. £65 million for what we call the National Space Innovation Programme, a really exciting programme and huge amount of interest in that. And we're starting to see the first successful bids emerging from NSIP. That's great. Talk about exciting, October. So you'd have seen the news about the signing of a MOU with a company called Axiom Space to hopefully help us towards an all-UK astronaut mission. This is an amazing opportunity for the UK, both to show that there's a new commercial model around human spaceflight, but also what a super opportunity around inspiration and engaging a much broader community, and particularly the young, in what we're doing. So that's going to be a big focus for us to bring that to life next year. November, we're nearly there. the UK Space Conference in Belfast. Who was there? Quick show of hands. Excellent. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was good. Bit wet and windy. Couple of things that for me really stood out, and I always talk about this one first. I was really honoured to be part of the Women in Space panel at the Space Conference. And it's the one thing actually after the event that I talk about the most, and it's the one thing that people say to me, oh, I saw you on that Women in Space conference. Really, really important, because it wasn't about women in space, it was about everyone in space, and how we can make this an environment where we all can contribute through different models. And actually, to be fair, hats off to our new employees in the Space Agency. It's not every organisation that would have someone at CEO level as a job share. Try that in the private sector, that's really quite unusual. So actually models like that, this allows us to stay in the workplace, and allows us to pursue other interests outside of the day job being here. So good job UK Space Agency, but actually the whole sector needs to find a way of embracing all of that talent in the UK. And for people like Annalise and I, who come into this sector really excited, we don't have degrees in astrophysics. I have an aero engineering degree, but I wouldn't claim at all to be a space expert. How do we bring other people into this sector who might see it as too difficult, or I'm not clever enough, or I don't have the academic background? Yes, you do. You can contribute, and that was really inspiring. And what's not to like about meeting and having dinner with Tim Peake and John McFord and the rest? So that was pretty cool as well. And in December, I think Rebecca did it about COP28. Just such an important statement, space now becoming very much at the heart of how we're thinking about the climate emergency and our role in that, and really great for the UK Space Agency and our partners to be part of that. And as part of that, we announced some big new contracts for Airbus and Teledyne for the Truths mission, the ESA Truths mission, which is going to be a really important part of the fight against climate change. So that's just a quick skirt around. It's just a scratch of the surface of the incredible work that goes on and has gone on. And Annalise and I are continually in awe of what we see and what's going on. A bit like Rebecca, I might do a bit of a forward look into next year. I'm not going to make it like that from our own correspondent thing where you have to make predictions about what's going to happen. But let me just give you a sort of a few areas. And I'll chunk this down by some of our big priority areas in the Space Agency. So I started in January on launch. So perhaps I'll start with launch again. So a new world of launch is emerging. Rebecca touched on it, ESA are thinking about it. Actually, we're in a quite difficult place on launch at the moment. There's no indigenous European launch capability that's current. In the US, of course, they're increasingly pretty much reliant on commercial providers now to do this. What's the UK's part in that? And I think shaping that into 2024 is going to be a really important priority for us. The National Space Strategy set out a really clear ambition to be Europe's leading provider of small satellite launch capability by 2030. That won't happen on its own. That will happen through investment, through determination, and so on. Next year, we should see the first vertical launches from Scotland. And you know, there's work going on in Sutherland and at Saxavord on Shetland to do that. Not just important for space, but super important for those local economies, and a really great example of space being something that's ubiquitous across the UK. And a particular focus next year on what we call launch phase 2 and moving beyond the Virgin Orbit launch into the next stage of helping the industry in the sector realise that grand ambition that we have. Julie Black leads our discovery and sustainability world. That's a pretty big portfolio that she's got there. So in that area, obviously, we'll continue developing the work with Axiom on the UK astronaut mission. I'm sure you will hear more about that in 2024. We're actually going to put out the calls for potential experiments to do on the mission. That should be coming out in January. So keep your eyes open for that. Some really exciting opportunities there. And again, connect that with the outreach and inspiration notions that mission brings. Yeah, sustainability is a really good question, and just perhaps build a little bit on that from what Rebecca said as well. So we are, as you know, pursuing a UK active debris removal mission, and definite next steps will happen on that in the first part of next year. And continuing to show global thought leadership around this area. And I was with yesterday with our team that does 24/7 space surveillance and tracking. So we provide this service free of charge to UK licensed satellite operators in conjunction with the Ministry of Defence, and that partnership's going to only grow through next year. And it's an amazing example, actually, of both the international community coming together, both to feed data about debris and conjunction risks and so on, but also to provide that data in an open source fashion to people across the world. So a really, really exciting area. But actually, the way we're framing this is around, in the counterterrorism world, they talk about, I need to get this right, prevent, protect, prepare, and pursue. That's actually not a bad framework to think about how you deal with the security in space, and that's we in the Space Agency are plugging in various ways into all of those sort of areas. Really happy to take questions on that. Something called NFIS, that's the UK-led instrument that's going to go on to the Rosalind Franklin Mars rover. Really excited to get that program up and running the back end of this year, and that's one of our big delivery priorities for the new year. And then I will do a bit of prediction. On Christmas Eve of 2023, the first UK science instrument that will hopefully land on the moon and study water is due to launch. Earth observation and low Earth orbit. Rebecca talked about Copernicus. I won't cover any more on that. Building our Earth observation investments, creating a new low Earth orbit team in the agency to build on connectivity in low Earth orbit and how important that is. We'll continue our work on the National Space Innovation Programme. We'll deliver, we've got 13 projects now up and running under the Space Clusters in Space Clusters Infrastructure Fund, or just call it SCIF, I wanted to define it. And the last area, and Annie will talk a bit about this, I'm sure, this afternoon, around championing space. So we've committed £15 million already to our inspiration programme next year, and that will be a real boost to the great work. But I won't eat Anna's sandwiches from this afternoon, because there's some amazing work going on. And actually, back to our idea about space for everyone, that's such an important part of it. So thank you for having us today. Thank you for making us feel so welcome. Annalise and I have a really simple mantra, which we call people first. It's all about valuing what everybody can bring in their way to the sector. I think that's such a good mantra, and that's the challenge I would give all of us, both in the room, online, and beyond. Yeah, how are we making the very best of that amazing talent that exists already in the sector, but how are we bringing the new talent in as well? That's one of the things that Annalise and I are determined to do in our time in the Space Agency. So, as Paul is fond of saying, I think someone mentioned it earlier, space is a team sport. Indeed it is. And we're just really excited, Annalise and me, to be part of your team. Thank you for having us.
Chris, thank you. I do remember, I'm so glad you mentioned the Women in Aerospace event at the conference. That's actually where I first heard you and
Okay.
Annalise speak.
Yeah.
And I thought it was amazing that you were so open about your own past, your own history, and the challenges you've had. But also, it was amazing to hear how positive you felt that your welcome into the agency and the space sector was. And that was really amazing. I think we should all sort of recognise that actually we're in a really privileged position to be able to make a change for the positive in terms of inclusivity and diversity of thinking in the space sector. And it was really heartening to hear that you felt that we were making strides there. So thank you for that. Any questions from the floor first? I'll go online. Thank you. Oh, right, here's an easy one for you. Where do you see the agency in 20 years' time?
Harwell. So, as you know, we're going through a locations piece of work. So that's a slightly trite comment. But yeah, our headquarters, I expect in 20 years will be in Harwell. I brought Anu actually to answer difficult questions, so I might ask him to offer his view as well. But if we get this right, the UK Space Agency will be at the heart of global thinking. I suspect in 20 years, we're never going to match the budget of a NASA, but actually we want to punch above our weight. We want to make space an absolute part of the way UK society works and how we exert influence in the world. And that we've got a sector full of people like Annalise and I and others who come into it new, were welcomed, and have a fulfilling career 20 years on from today in space. I think that's all of our mission, isn't it?
Brilliant. Well, here's a good follow-on question here. How can we encourage more diversity into the space sector?
Should have come to the Women in Space event. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think back to the mantra of space is a team sport. I think we need to move people's thinking to the point where, how can I contribute to this team? And I also use the mantra inside the agency, delivery is a team sport. We need space professionals, scientists and engineers, but we need commercial experts to work out how to interact with the sector. We need finance specialists. We need project managers and project delivery professionals. We need HR people. We need comms professionals. So actually, firstly, making the environment really welcome and saying, you don't need to have a degree in astrophysics to be in this world. Some roles you do, and that's important. We value that specialism, but there are other specialisms and so on. I'll do an unadulterated plug for flexible working and work share. Don't make all your roles things that one normal human being can do in 5 days a week in 37 hours or whatever your organisation thinks a standard week is. By doing that, you're excluding lots of people like me who don't want to work to that pattern. So let's all have a think about how we offer work flexible. If I look at my kids who are going through university, their expectation of the world of work is very, very different to what it was when I started out in the mid-1990s, utterly different. So let's not cast our 1990s thinking back on today's generation. So lots of things we do. Come and talk to me in the interview. I've got loads more to say on that.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any questions from the floor? I've got one final question online. Great, so I'll ask a question online. So we've heard both yourself and Rebecca talk about an amazing amount of work that's going on in the UK space sector at the moment. And for this attendee, the pace of change has been quite significant. So they're asking, how does the UK sustain that acceleration of pace of work, and what is the main challenge to maintaining that pace?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a very live challenge as well. I think the National Space Strategy set out a really, really grand ambition. As ever in government, that the art of this is to match the strategy with the reality, with the money, with the intent and so on. So I think our first big challenge is to make sure that we're focusing on the right things, that we're spending every pound that government gives us really well, and we're using every pound to catalyse more than that outside. And there's some data that shows that we're pretty successful at that. We need to be even better at that so we get more gearing for our money. When we do stuff, let's make it count. Let's not be averse to risk. And I think there's a temptation, and governments love certainty. They love low risk propositions. Of course, no one likes things to go wrong. That is not how we're going to become a world leader in space. So one of the other things that Annalise and I are really keen to do is to have a more mature approach, to put it that way, to risk appetite, and be really clear about risk appetite. But for me, it boils down to, let's work out what we want to be really good at. There probably is no future in going across a massively broad front and doing lots and lots of things sort of a bit well, because others in the world aren't working like that. Others in the world are being more interventionist. They are focusing on areas and they're making it happen. So I think the dilemma we have is breadth versus depth. Where do you pick the winners? How do you pick the winners? And so on. I think that's a really live challenge that we'll have to deal with. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Right. Thank you very much, Chris White-Horne.